Hey everybody, and welcome back to Ready Steady Play. And I'm here today with a prototype copy of a game called Zerywia. So this is a Polish game by designer Dominik Kraspicki, and I'm sorry Dominic for that. But if you found this video, then you're probably on the Kickstarter page for this game, or maybe you saw that it had been crowdfunded in Poland and you're intrigued to find out more. Well, fear not, for I'm here to instruct you. The game is fully cooperative. At the time of this video, it's for 1 to 4 players. Like I said, it is in the prototype stages still, so a lot of this is subject to change. Now, the game is a campaign game, but it's not a long campaign game like Gloomhaven. It takes place usually in around 3 chapters, but this, of course, will depend on your initial setup and what you've chosen to play. A typical session will last anywhere between an hour and 3 hours, depending on your player count and the setup that you've chosen. And you will play 3 chapters over the course of a full campaign. There is a save, so you can save between chapters and come back to the game. And, of course, the decisions you make in each chapter will affect the game entirely. There's also a quick start mode, which allows you to pretty much play out an entire saga in one sitting. This is a sandbox-style fantasy adventure game set in the world of Slavic mythology, which I am far from an expert on. But what I do know is that Ugmor is a bad guy, and he has lots of bad friends. And in this game, you're going to pick one of these big bads, and they are going to appear around the Venetian Sea, which is this land here. We're going to take on the roles of heroes, traveling across the land, completing sagas and quests in order to build up our fame, our fortune, and our powers and our magical powers, and acquire mythical weapons in order to take the fight to Ugmor. Meanwhile, Ugmor is spreading insidious murk across the land, and if this murk builds up, it's going to defile the land, and we are going to lose the game. So it's a race against time. So normally what I do in these videos is I run down a very comprehensive version of the rules, but because of the prototype stage we're at here, and we're sort of avoiding story spoilers and all those kinds of things, what I'm going to do is give you an overview of all the mechanics at play here, and what you can expect when you embark on the Zerywia adventure. So we'll start off by having a look at the player setups, because they introduce some very interesting mechanics, and then I'll talk you through how some of the basic adventuring works, and also the overarching quest, how you're going to complete that in order to take on the big boss. In this demo game, it's Ugmor. So at the beginning of the game, you'll pick a hero. This is an example. We've got Gorth the Hungerer. You may also want to be Dalbor the Murk-bathed. Murk is the evil that's spreading out from Ugmor the villain. He's somewhat of a barbarian type character. And then we've got Veda, Sister of Hollows, and she's sort of like a witch or a Morgana style character. And finally, Svara the Vengeful Grace, who can actually tame a dragon, which is, pretty neat. Once each player's picked a character, we'll also have to pick a villain. Now in this case we've got Ugmor, who's some kind of herald of greater darkness. I'm not entirely sure, but he's pretty bad. So we're going to try and bring him down before he can do more wrong. So once each player has picked a character, then they'll take appropriate stuff for that character. So here we've got a player board. When you get the player board, you're going to take your character card here, and you're going to put it down here into the player slot. You have 3 equipment slots on your character's board. You'll start with some character-specific equipment to put into these slots. So we've got some examples here. We've got the bone armor, which Svara collects from the creatures she hunts and compiles, and it's got magical properties. Here's a bow called the Silent Flash, and her axe called Hole Eater's Fang. Under each piece of equipment, you'll find this deck called the Saga deck. And this is a big old deck of cards, and each deck starts with a quest. So in this case, we've got the Thirst for Blood. And we've got a whole lot of flavor text here telling us just what's going on. And then these are a series of tasks we'll have to do. And down here, we've got some outcome once you complete the tasks. Then you'll make a choice about what reward you're going to have, so that when you complete the task, you turn it over, and you've got some rewards here to choose from. And these rewards might be new actions in the form of magical abilities or mythical artifacts. You might also find upgrades for your existing weapons and equipment. And then we move on to the next part of the quest. And there's some cool surprises if you get to the end of the saga. What we're going to do is, based on the scenario you're playing and the enemy you're playing against and the character you're playing, you'll pick different sagas each time. But for the purposes of this demo, we're just going to put out these 3 sagas. So Svara starts with her bone armor, a bow here, and her axe here. And then we've got these saga decks, which we'll put out next to our player board. Once we've put our equipment in place, we're just going to sort out our stat line. So down here we've got 3 stats. So we've got strength along the top here, represented by an axe. Instinct along the middle here, represented by this eye. And at the bottom, will, represented by this burning flame. So we check our stats here on our player card, and we can see that Svara's stats here, she's got 5 strength, 6 instinct, and 4 will. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these little appropriate tokens and just put them onto the appropriate slots here. And then we've got these little wound tokens as well, and I'll explain how wounding works later when we talk about the combat mechanics in the game, but we're going to set up our player board like this. We're also going to take 3 white primal stones to put down here, and 1 little action marker to go into this slot here. And we'll explain how all of this works when we get to gameplay in just a moment. Each player should also have 1 die of each color. Each die is of course associated with one of your stat lines here. And you'll probably need one of these black Oblivion dies as well. We don't like these though, they're mean to us. We've also got this deck of shards. These are magical items, magical sort of necklaces with properties on them. Each player will start with 1 random shard. So we've started with the shard of Jaruna. Each character also gets to start with a blessing token, which they can keep on their saga stone. So here we've got Svara all set up. She's got her 3 sagas along the top here, each corresponding to one of her weapons or items down here. And she's got her shard all set up here. There is a limit to the amount of equipment you can equip and use, which is detailed here on your character card, but Svara is very good at carrying lots of weapons. She's not so good at spells, though. This is our Saga Stone, and under here we're going to put any titles we unlock, and we're also going to use it to hold any trophies we capture in the wild. So, we'll take our miniature, and we'll get ready to put it on the board. Over here I've got a player area set up for Veda, Sister of the Hollows. She starts with one of these action cards here as well, called Stunt cards in the game, and the Shard of Jesha. She's got her quests up here ready to go, and Veda only has 1 weapon here because she's a witch. She's also got some magical spells here. So now that we're all ready with our heroes ready to go, we're going to take our evil character Ugmore here and put him in the Citadel of Shadows, which is this dark area in the center of the map. Now over the course of the game he's going to be collecting dark energies here, and when he amasses enough, then he will begin the final confrontation or else corrupt the land to darkness. If he corrupts the land to darkness before we can take the fight to him, then we lose the game. So, what's preventing us? Well, we need some kind of magical weapon. I mean, we can unlock these sagas I just showed you to get some powerful weapons, but we need something truly special. We need the Spear of Life. So this scenario is called Two Faces, and in it we need to find the Spear of Life through a series of grueling tasks, and then we need to take the Spear of Life to the Citadel of Silence and use it to defeat Ugmore in a massive final confrontation. There are some exceptional circumstances where if we get the Spear of Life, he could actually come and take it from us and corrupt it and use it against us, in which case we're in serious trouble. But that's unlikely to happen, right? So we've got Ugmore hiding out here in the Citadel of Shadows. And so over here we've got some decks of cards that correspond to Ugmore and what he can do. So here's the Defiled Spear. This is in case he takes it from us. We really don't want this to happen. Here we've got the Gaze of Nix, which is some evil cards that he can put into the monster deck, which is here. And then we've got down here his attack cards. Here's some activation cards that come out every round. And over here we've got his special event cards. And I'll talk about these when we get to his phase in the rules explanation. We've also got Ugmore's nasty Sorrow Plains here, which could come into our deck and cause us trouble later on. As we venture around the Venetian Sea, we will also have this scenario-specific quest, the Spear of Life. If we can find this item before the final confrontation, it will certainly help us to defeat Ugmore. Unfortunately, the Spear of Life has been broken into a number of pieces equal to the number of players. Each player will be assigned a quest card to help them retrieve their piece, which they will personally have to complete in order for us to gain the spear. And that means putting together the tokens here in order to unlock the task here at the location here. So the player who is assigned the Trial of Courage card will have to travel to Oteru Blaze with these tokens and complete this task. But we'll talk more about tasks when we get to exploration during the rules explanation. Here in the center of the board we've got Sventovid, the statue of the gods.
and Sventovid sits in the middle of the board, tracking time passing.
But it's not all doom and gloom with Ugmore killing us. We've also got this wonderful land to explore, and we're going to wander around here, and we're going to go into these 4 decks of adventure cards as well. So, we've got all of those decks out there, shuffled and ready to go. So up to the side, we've also got a deck of magical items here, which we're going to give a shuffle. These are magical items we can find hidden all over the world. And we've got a deck of blessing stones here as well. These are magical stones like the necklaces we start with, which we can find hidden around the world and use them to help our friends. So now that we're all set up and we're ready to begin play, each hero will deploy in a stronghold on the board. So let's have a look at the board and how it's laid out. The board is laid out into 4 quarters called thymores, and each thymore is divided up into regions. So here we've got the northeast thymore of the board, and you can see it's divided up into all these individual regions. And each of the regions has a different type. For example, here we've got the Storm Gates, which has this mountain symbol. Here we've got the Claw of Kadura, which is a forest. Down here we've got Vratra's Flame, which is a town. And then over here the Valley of Mounds, which is both a mountain and a ruin. There are also all of these magical symbols here, as well as some more mundane ones. Here we've got a stronghold, and at the beginning of the game, each character will start in one of the 4 strongholds on the board. There's 1 stronghold in each thymore. In addition to the stronghold, there are all these extra symbols here that represent sort of different elements to the different regions on the thymore. So down here we've got the Exis Temples, and then this one over here is called Shrouds. Up here we've got Prime Sources. This one's called the Cradles. And up here we've got Zerywia Ruins.
Different cards will reference these different areas, and in certain scenarios they'll have special actions you can take as well.
So of course this is all based around the Venetian Sea, and these different regions, some of them have these anchor symbols here, and if you're in a region with an anchor symbol, then you can just move to any other region with an anchor symbol using a simple move action. So we can move around the board relatively easily, getting between the thymores relatively easily. So at the beginning of the game, we're going to put out some Murk on the board, and the amount of tokens you put out depends on the difficulty you're playing. If you're playing on easy mode, you'll put out 4, 1 in each quadrant, 1 in each thymore. If you're playing on a harder mode, it's 8, 2 in each thymore, and if you want to go for a really heroic quest, then you're going to put out 12, 3 in each thymore. So for the 2 Faces scenario, we're instructed to put 1 Murk on each region containing the Veil of Vela, also known as the Shroud symbol I showed you earlier. Murk looks like this, which of course mimics the Citadel of Silence. So we're going to start with 1 here, 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 and here in the Creeping Marsh. And now it's time to put out our faithful heroes. Svara has decided she's going to start here at the Zerywia Stone, and we're going to put Veda over here on the other side of the world at the Wolf Gate. So, with that, the players can begin the very first turn of the game. Every turn of the game is divided up into 4 phases. It begins with a dawn phase, where anything that triggers at dawn triggers. This is just a window for items and things to trigger. Then there's an action phase, a day phase where heroes take turns taking actions. This is followed by a campfire phase where heroes recover and regenerate, which is followed by a night phase in which Ugmore acts. The night phase is also called the Nix Phase. And after the Nix Phase is complete, we go back to the dawn phase. So in this case, our heroes starting out in the world have nothing to do during the dawn phase, so we go straight to the day phase. I won't cover the dawn phase again because again it's just a trigger point for cards and things that say they do something during that phase. Heroes take 4 actions during the day phase. They can take these actions in any order they want, and they can support each other if they take actions during the same period. Allow me to explain. A hero's actions are tracked here on their player board. It begins with a dawn, and then a day, a dusk phase, and a night phase. And as we take our 4 actions during our turn, we'll move our action token across the 4 times of day. When every hero has their token in the night space, we'll go over here to the campfire space to resolve the campfire phase. And then we'll do the Nix phase and begin the process over again, starting with the dawn check. It is important to note these times of day because certain things might trigger depending on the time of day, and furthermore, heroes can only help each other out
if they're taking actions during the same time of day. What this means is that if Svara wants to use her next action to attack an enemy, she will move it from day to dusk. A hero in the same region can take this exact same movement from day to dusk in order to help her with her attack. But if their token is not on the day space, then they cannot assist.
This is important because if you're moving around the board independently, then it doesn't really matter who takes what actions when, although you will want to think about it because it's important to consider. But if you do want to help each other out, because you're going up against a particularly difficult challenge, then you will want to make sure you're in the same region and going into the same action step. So, now that we're looking at the hero's actions, let's talk about the 4 actions they can take. The heroes can take a move action, where they move from one region to another. If they're moving by land, they can move into any adjacent land region. And if they're moving by ocean, they can move from any region with a port to any other region with a port. So for example, Veda could move from the Wolf Gate here all the way over to the Misty Shores here with one move action. If you're ever in an area that contains Murk and you want to move out of it, you're going to take 1 attribute point of damage. So in this case, Svara wants to go to the Cadaver Estuary, and unfortunately she has to take 1 attribute of damage. So she's going to spend 1 instinct to do that. The second action you can take is Explore, where you'll draw one of the cards from these 4 decks based on the area that you're in. After that, you can also take on a challenge. You can take on a challenge from a quest or from a saga, and also you can challenge any Murk tokens in the region you're in. And this is important because you need to start clearing up this Murk before it overwhelms the board and gets you in real trouble. The final action is Rest, where you recover some of the attributes that you've spent. And that will make more sense when we talk about taking on challenges in just a minute. So, we spoke briefly about tasks earlier when we looked at the Spear of Life. Now we're going to talk about tasks in relation to your sagas. So here are Svara's sagas, and she's going to be thinking about how she's going to unlock these to get her powerful weapons to go and defeat Ugmore. Here's the first saga she's got for her axe, Thirst for Blood, and these symbols can be found throughout the game. We're going to be going hunting for these symbols by doing different quests and missions all over the board. So here we've got a trophy, a settlement, and a mountain. So we have to complete an exploration in a settlement and a mountain area, and we have to defeat a monster in order to get the trophy. Once we've collected these 3 things, we can unlock the card, grab a reward, and proceed to the next part of the saga. Furthermore, we might get some of these cool titles here like Feared. So with this in mind, Svara is looking for somewhere where she can get a trophy, a settlement, or a mountain. Well, it just so happens she started off in the Zerywia Stone area, which is both a settlement and a mountain area. And that means that we can do an exploration action of either of these decks, and chances are we're going to be able to collect one of those tokens for completing the exploration card. When we get one of the tokens, depending on which card we completed, we'll say it was a mountain card, then we get to put that on top of the saga card. And now we've got one of the 3 symbols we need. When we collect all 3 symbols, we complete the card. But let's talk about how we find this mountain symbol. So Svara is picked to do an explore, and she can draw from one of these 2 decks. As you can see, we've got the 4 decks laid out across the top of the board, so Svara decides to take a mountain card from the mountain deck. And so we see here on this card a quest, and it's got some flavor text along the top, and then it's got a decision point here. So we've got 2 options here. We've got this option and this option, and we must choose one or the other. Based on what we choose, we'll have to complete a different task or pay a different price, and then we'll get a different reward. And because this one has text down both sides, we'll also unlock some of these keywords. If Svara, for example, decides to go against the Murk, spending 3 will, and then extract it to gain a Murk token, then her success will restore 3 primal energies. Well, I haven't talked about primal energies yet, but they're the white tokens on our player board. So for Svara to complete this card, she has to spend 3 will. So we grab her will, which is 4, and we put it down to 1. Now that she's done that, she can gain a Murk token, which looks like this, and she can keep that on her Saga Stone. You can keep 3 different kinds of tokens on your Saga Stone: Murk tokens, Blessing tokens, and also Trophy tokens. Every other type of token must be immediately assigned to a quest card or it's lost, because they kind of represent wisdom and things you learn along the way, whereas these tokens represent physical things that you can find and hold on to. So unfortunately, Svara can't restore any of her Primal Stones because they're already full. But now that she's successfully completed this card, she can have either a token with this symbol here at the bottom, or a token with the mountain symbol on it.
The stronghold symbol next to the name of the region also indicates that this region contains a stronghold. If you complete an exploration card in this region, you can elect to have a stronghold symbol instead of a settlement or mountain symbol.
Because she needs the mountain symbol, she elects to take a mountain symbol, which she must immediately apply to one of her sagas or quests.
She can also apply it to the quest card she was assigned for the Spear of Life.
But as we looked at earlier, she decides to apply it to the axe. Because Svara completed the left side of this card, she also earns the keyword Condemned. The card is placed here under her saga stone, and she now has the Condemned keyword for the rest of the game. This will come up at certain points during the course of the game and trigger different outcomes on cards. There's no limit to the number of keywords you can have down here, so over the course of a single campaign, you'll have a developing picture of your character and the different escapades they've got up to, and you'll find out the repercussions of those. But we also want to get some trophies, and we also want to deal with this Murk. Now, sometimes when you explore a location, an enemy might pop out and attack you, but the most common way to find enemies is to go and try and clear the Murk tokens off of the board. You want to do this because if you don't, they could become defiled, which means they flip over to their red side. If there are too many tokens on their red side, we're going to start building up lots of ritual tokens here in the Citadel of Silence. More on that in a minute, but if too many ritual tokens build up here, then it's going to trigger an endgame loss for us, which we don't want. So one of the actions a hero can take is to challenge the Murk. When you challenge the Murk, you go here into the enemy deck and you draw an enemy off the top of the deck to fight. So here we've got some Devuru Hunters. And they've got this flavor text here, Spearhead of the Scorned. Reveal, this enemy gets a Murk symbol if you're injured. So this means that if you've taken an injury already, they're going to count as having rolled the most devastating symbol. So let's talk about the dice. So whenever you're taking on a conflict with a card like this, you have to do what's called a challenge. And a challenge is resolved using dice and statistics. The challenge phase takes place over 3 steps. The preparation step, in which you decide what dice you're going to take into the fight. This ends with the rolling of the dice pool. Then the determination step, where you can trigger any card effects you have that might alter the dice. And you also trigger any enemy's abilities that might alter their die. And then, at the end, you've got the conclusion step, where the dice results are resolved. A player will always begin a confrontation by forming a prime dice pool out of 3 dice. Now, the prime dice pool can only ever contain 3 dice, and it always by default contains 1 die for each statistic. Each phase in the challenge has a different symbol that represents it. This double dice symbol here represents the preparation phase, where we're building the initial dice pool. The determination phase is represented by this rolling die symbol here, and the conclusion phase is represented by these crossed swords. These tell you when these cards can be triggered, and also what kind of effect they might have. So in this case, we're looking at Veda's primary ability here. It says you may add 2 blue dice to your prime set. What this means is that you can take one of these 2 dice here and replace them with another blue die. So we could take away the green one and replace it with the blue one or the red one. So in this case, we want to defeat these Devuru Hunters. So let's take a look at what we need to defeat them. What we're looking at is this stat bar up here. So we've got a green symbol and a red symbol, and then a black and white version of the green insight symbol. So in order to defeat this card, we need 1 successful green symbol and 1 successful red symbol. Each die has 3 faces on it: success, failure, and a critical.
A critical result can either be used as a regular result, or it can be used to trigger a special effect from one of the cards on your player board.
So we'll have a look at what that can do in just a minute. But we need to have these symbols in order to defeat the card, and if we're able to get a second green symbol, we can also prevent the card from doing some damage. So we definitely want these 2 dice, so in this case we're going to decide not to use Veda's character ability. So having decided on the dice pool here, 1 of each color, we then pay the cost in attribute points. So if you remember our character board here, we're going to have to pay 1 red, 1 green, and 1 blue attribute to create that dice pool, 1 for each colored dice. So once you've compiled your prime set of dice, then you compile what's called your challenge set. So the prime set can only ever be 3, but now that we're on the challenge set, we can add more dice. Whenever you're compiling the challenge set, you always have to add 1 die for the enemy. Maybe more, depending on their abilities. Now, we might have some cool items that add extra dice. Unfortunately, we don't, which we know because we only have one ability here that happens during the preparation phase, which is this one that we already looked at. What we haven't discussed yet is Primal Energy. Primal Energy has 3 purposes during the challenge phase. 2 purposes that take place in the preparation phase, and 1 purpose in the determination phase. You can always spend 2 Primal Energy when you're creating your prime set of dice to change the color of one of the dice. So in this case, we might want to spend these 2 to change our blue die to a green die here, which will help us defend against this attack here. Remember, your prime set can only ever be 3 dice, so the Primal Energy is used to change the color of the dice. You can always spend 3 Primal Energy to add another die to your pool during the compilation of the challenge dice set. So we spend 3 Primal Energy and we can add a green die to the challenge die set.
The third use of Primal Energy is that later in the determination step, we can spend 1 Primal Energy to re-roll 1 die.
Once we've finished compiling the challenge dice set, we finish the preparation phase by rolling the dice. It's not great, but it's okay. Now we move on to the determination phase, and the enemy starts by resolving any determination abilities that they have. They don't have any, so we'll start resolving the dice. These 2 blanks are failures, and they're useless to us.
If we had 1 more Primal Energy, we could spend it to re-roll 1 of these dice, but we've already spent it all. Let's take a moment to talk about the results on the enemy's black Oblivion die.
If the enemy rolls this symbol here, they do a basic attack, inflicting damage that matches this black and white symbol. So in this case, they would do 1 instinct damage. But if they roll this symbol, they do a critical damage, which means an instinct damage that's unblockable. And if they roll this symbol here, the Murk symbol, also the Citadel of Silence symbol, then they'll actually do this special attack down the bottom, and they'll do an extra strength damage as well as the instinct damage.
This means that
this die here will be assigned to the Murk symbol down here, and will deal 1 strength and 1 instinct damage to us if we can't do anything about that. Here we've got this green symbol, which resolves this situation up here, and we've got this blue critical. So we're going to check our character card to see what we can do with that. So when you're using criticals, you always want to check the bottom text on any of these cards here, and any of your stunt cards here. Now, a stunt card is identifiable by this lightning bolt symbol here, and what that means is that when you use it once per turn, you have to flip it over. At the end of your turn, during the Campfire phase, you'll be able to recover 1 stunt card. So you have to decide whether you want to blow through them all in a big turn, or maybe pace them out over a couple of turns, because you're only going to be able to regenerate 1. Because these items are equipped on our character, and because these cards are not stunt cards, they won't be exhausted if we use them. So here we can see that this blue critical allows us to turn it into an instinct and a will rune. If we take this critical, then we'll take a rune of each type and just add it to our dice pool. So now we've got 2 green successes and a blue success. Unfortunately, this is not really helpful for us and our challenge here. Under these circumstances, the critical and Farsight of Doom might prove to be more useful. It says remove the enemy's Murk result and add an instinct rune. So if we trigger that critical, then we get to add 1 instinct rune, but more importantly, we get to remove the enemy's result, which will prevent them from doing this killer attack. So now that we've done that, we can move on to the conclusion phase. Unfortunately, we haven't managed to get the successes we needed, so we haven't defeated the card. However, because we were able to use our critical to remove their Murk symbol, we also don't take any damage. Let's pretend that we weren't able to do that. Then we would take 1 strength and 1 instinct damage. So we'd go over here to our board and take 1 strength and 1 instinct damage like that. This represents our hero becoming increasingly exhausted by the stress of protecting the world. If our token ever would move into the 0 space, then we're going to start taking injuries, moving these brown tokens down our board. And in order to move these tokens back up, it's going to cost us extra. And we'll talk about how to heal these in just a minute. We can always rest as an action, which allows us to recover 2 points either on one, or which allows us to recover 2 points on these tracks. So maybe 1 strength and 2 strengths, or 1 strength and an instinct, for example. If we want to heal this wound, note we can never go over our maximum board line here, unless there's a card that allows us to do so. If we want to heal this strength injury, we need to get our strength all the way back up to 4, and then pay double strength points. So heal 2 more strength, i.e. with a single rest, or perhaps during the campfire phase, which will allow us to push this one back up and get our strength back up to full. So it should be noted that even if you do take an injury, you can always go and heal it. You can't actually die until the final confrontation with the boss. What this means is that you can wind up with these tokens pretty far down, and if you're not looking after yourself and moving these tokens back up, you're going to find yourself with very little attributes to spend on doing cool things, and then you might as well be dead. Any tokens that were applied are just returned to the common pool, the dice are returned to the player, and the enemy card is put in a discard pile. If Veda had been successful in clearing the Murk, she would have been able to claim this Murk token, as well as a trophy token, and stored them on her Saga stone. However, because she was unsuccessful, the Murk remains, and she must try again. If both of our players are in the same region, they can team up by taking the same action. So if both players started in the same region, they could both go to their Dawn step here and here, which would allow them to combine their efforts. Now, they pick a leader, and they can pick either character to be the leader, and the leader will carry out a challenge just like I showed you. However, there are a few distinctions. During this combat, Svara will make a prime set of dice, but out of just 1 die. So, again, the leader, in this case Veda, chooses and draws an enemy card. So in this case, Veda's drawn the Loopier. The Loopier requires 2 instinct successes in order to kill it. Veda will make up her primary die set as normal, but because she's got Svara helping her, Svara can make her own prime die set, and she'll add a green die because we need 2 green successes. She could pick 1 die of any color in this prime set, but she gets just 1 because she's in support. Now, any other abilities that can help her, she can use. So if she rolls a critical, for example, she can reference all of her equipment cards to try and turn it into something useful. If she has any stunt cards that she can activate them to help out as well. And that indicates that it is, of course, used during the determination phase. So once each hero has completed 4 actions, we move on to the Campfire phase. Now, there are several things that happen in the Campfire phase. We're going to reference our cards, and our heroes are going to regenerate some attributes. So in this case, what we're looking at are any abilities with this Campfire symbol here. So in this case, we get to restore 1 Primal Shard and 2 of any stat line. So we get a Primal Shard back.
And we can restore 2 stat points in the same or different rows.
Because Veda is also next to the white stone here, the Primal Shard on the Statue of the Gods, then she gains an additional Primal Shard. Svara is in the Thymore next to the Instinct token here, so she'll recover 1 additional point of Instinct during the Campfire phase. So here's Veda's extra point of Primal Energy. You'll notice we've also got here, on far side of Doom, a little campsite symbol that says Restore 1 extra will. Well, we're already at maximum will, but that's important to note that you also get to take all of those in the Campfire phase. For the sake of example, let's say that Svara's also discovered the Quarrel Sword during her adventures. Now, she's already maxed out here on her player board of the things she can carry, so Quarrel will just have to remain here to one side.
During the Campfire phase, characters can swap out any cards on their player board with any other cards they've found, but remember, they must obey the restrictions outlined here on their character card. For example, Svara can carry 3 weapons, 1 other item, or up to 2 allies.
You can freely reorganize your player board as much as you want during the Campfire phase based on how many items you have. And then, of course, if you've spent any of your stunt cards during your turn, you can recover 1 of them. When a weapon is here in your backpack or your inventory, or basically not equipped on your player board, then you get access to this banner ability here.
So what this symbol here is indicating on this item card is that during the determination phase of a challenge, you can reroll 1 red die. This ability doesn't have a cost, so you can use it once per challenge.
And that's it for the Campfire phase, so we move on to the Nix Phase, which is when Ugmore here is going to do some nefarious bad stuff. Ugmore has a set of activation cards here, and we're going to activate 1 card for each hero on the board, plus an additional card in the Night Thymore. More on that in just a minute, but we'll start with Veda's card. Now it should be noted the players can choose to activate cards for the heroes in any order. So our first card here is Tearing the Veil. Spread Murk on the Vela Shroud in this Thymore. Well, that's bad because we've already got one on the Vela Shroud in this area. So this means that this token flips over and is now on its defiled side. If we get too many of these on the board, it means bad news. Here it says, if there is a hero in that region, which there is, then we move Ugmori there and he challenges the hero with one of his attacks. This is very bad. So he's going to come out of the Citadel of Silence and attack poor Veda straight away. When this happens, we go into his attack deck here and draw a card, and this is the attack he's going to do on Veda. This works just the same way as a challenge with any monster. So you can see up here the successes you need, the damage you've got incoming, down here any flavor text, and special rules that might impact the fight. Make sure you read these carefully and execute them. Now down here it says here that if he does a critical damage, then he'll do these 3 damage instead of these 2. So it should be noting that the Touch of Ugmor doesn't have a Murk effect, so if you roll this symbol you're actually okay, but it does have an extra bad critical, so you really don't want to roll that symbol. Remember, when you roll that, it means that the damage becomes unblockable. Now, if Veda manages to defeat this card, and this is carried out just like any other challenge, which means she can expend her resources and her special abilities to accomplish it. However, they won't regenerate until the next Campfire phase. So you have to be careful overexerting yourself here and being unable to do anything in your action phase. But however, if Veda fails to defeat this card, then Ugmor just stays here in the Pochara of Desolation, and he also prevents anyone in the area from doing a rest action. This is especially bad, for example, if Veda gets trapped in here, because in order to walk out of a region that contains Murk, you actually have to take 1 attribute damage as well. So we'll say for the sake of the example that Veda does not defeat Ugmor's card, and now Ugmor just lives here with her. And this card is discarded until later. So we ignore the last activation at the bottom of this card because it's not the last activation card that's going to be played. But now we've resolved this Thymore, so we move over here to Svara and resolve her card. So this one says, place Murk on the cradle in this area. Well, fortunately that's not where Svara is, so she can ignore this middle part because there is no hero in the region where the Murk was placed, and we ignore last activation because this still isn't the last activation card. In addition to dealing 1 card to each player, you also deal a card into the area with the blue stone. This is called the Dawn Stone, and a card always goes in here. This is always counted as the last activation, so we will enact the bottom of the card. So we're going to place Murk on the prime source here in this Thymore. There's no hero there, so we can ignore the middle of this card, but then we have to do the last activation. Ugmor gets 1 black stone plus 1 additional black stone for each 2 red Murk tokens on the map. So here is the black stone, and this goes into the Citadel of Silence. Now, if we ever accumulate 7 black stones here in the Citadel of Silence, then we're going to flip over an event card. Event cards look like this, and they always contain text that's bad for us, and we don't want it to happen.
In a campaign game, you might also have to replace the stones on Sventovid with black stones, which is really bad as well, and that has an ongoing effect for the rest of the campaign.
But now that we've completed this last activation card, we can collect them all back up. We can put them into a discard pile, and of course if you ever run out, just reset the discard pile. But once that's done, then we're ready to progress back to the Dawn phase. So if all 4 stones here ever get placed with the black Oblivion stones, then the game is over and the villain has won. The only way for the heroes to win is to acquire the Spear of Life and trigger the final confrontation with Ugmor. So Svara must travel to where Ugmor is, and then the heroes can trigger the final confrontation. Note that you're not allowed to trigger the final confrontation if you don't have the Spear of Life. But that doesn't mean that Ugmor can't actually come to you and trigger the confrontation himself. There are a few cards that do this, and if he does it, then you all just immediately have to go and fight him. And I just hope you've done enough powering up in order to take him on. So when the final confrontation is triggered, we'll bring Ugmor's card, we'll put it in the center of the board, and then he'll deal 1 attack to each hero that's confronting him. So the first attack here, and the second attack here. Now these attacks are resolved just as the cards we've already looked at, But the key thing here is that if you exceed the challenge on the card itself, then any excess tokens you have are applied directly to Ugmore. So we'll say, for example, it's pretty far-fetched, but Svara has the first 4 are used to cancel the 4 symbols here, and the 5th strength is bounced over to Ugmore. And we just take one of these strength symbols and put them down on him. Now that Svara's card is completed, it is discarded, and she can help by providing support to Veda to take on her card, but it should be noted that Veda must complete her card herself. Once both cards are defeated, then we simply shuffle the deck and begin again. And so you must continue this until you get enough symbols on Ugmore to defeat him, or until everyone is dead. Remember how I said you couldn't die earlier? Well, in the final confrontation you can. You can die quite easily, in fact. If any of your attributes ever reaches 0 during the final confrontation, you are dead and eliminated from the game. So you want to try and avoid that happening if possible, but maybe, just maybe, a big heroic sacrifice will enable you to take out Ugmore himself by getting the excess damage needed. Heroes are, of course, welcome to use any stunt cards or any loot that they've compiled together during this time in order to help them out. In fact, hopefully they will have some stuff because they're going to need it. If you manage to get all of the symbols on Ugmore required to defeat him, then he's defeated and you've won the game. Congratulations. But if you don't, then he's defeated you and killed you all, and you'll have to try again. So I hope that's given you some really useful insights into the mechanics and how Zerywia works. But if you really want to see the game in action, I'll be back tomorrow with my friend Michael as we get our heroes together to take on Ugmore and see if we can't do some good in ridding the world of evil. But first we better power up a bit and make sure we're up to the challenge. So I hope you'll consider coming back and joining us for that. And if you haven't, consider subscribing to Ready Steady Play on YouTube, because we'd love to have you along for any of the future adventures we might take. And we have plenty of past adventures up there as well, in case you're interested. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.